Hi, Mickey.
Hey, Bob.
Hey, Mickey, I see you've got some Lysol there.
Correct. Why do you have Lysol, Mickey?
Why do you have Lysol, Mickey?
Because Joe Biden is disinfecting the White House, or is going to disinfect the White House. And I'm sure he appreciates the metaphor of fumigating the White House, but I think it's actually real. He is known to be completely paranoid about getting the virus because his wife thinks it will kill him, and she's not crazy. He's very old. So this leads me to my other aspect where he's being incredibly defensive and cautious and paranoid, which is
good transition there. That was really I didn't even notice that.
I know, it was seamless. Our crackpot theory of the day.
Mickey, I will say for the benefit of our listening audience, is donning his tinfoil hat again.
Which allows me to subtly distance myself from the crackpot theories I'm about to spout. But if you notice his cabinet picks, Bob,
yeah,
and everybody notices immediately, they're his friends. They're people he knows.
We've observed that in past podcasts.
We have?
Yes, I have.
Because between the two podcasts, he appointed another friend, General Austin, who is good friends with his son Beau,
and with him, he bonded with Austin over Iraq.
So there's another friend,
right?
And Tom Vilsack, another friend,
right?
As Secretary of Agriculture, and there's a Vilsack angle I'll get to later, but why might he want friends to occupy cabinet positions?
Well, the theory I floated, I was talking about this after a few picks, including Tony Blinken, Jake Sullivan, people he had worked with closely. Well, what's your theory? I don't really. Mine is a little slightly unseemly. I'm sure yours won't be.
Mine is the 25th Amendment. If he's worried about being removed from office because of his evident cognitive decline, it shouldn't happen. The way Senator Feinstein is being hounded out of office even as we speak, it helps to have friends in cabinet positions because the cabinet is what votes on the 25th Amendment. In other words, Jake Sullivan doesn't vote because he's not in the cabinet, not going to be in the cabinet. But all the cabinet officials, there are 15 of them, they vote, and so far he's got like 4 friends there. He only needs like 4 more, and he has a solid majority, so he cannot be, booted out of office frivolously, by suppose the left decides, well, we'd rather have Kamala Harris than this senile old guy, and they mount a Feinstein-like campaign against him. This is his insurance policy, just as disinfecting the White House is his insurance policy.
Yeah, well, when I talked about this in the context of Sullivan and Blinken, I didn't mention the 25th Amendment, and I wasn't even thinking about it. I did mention Biden's cognitive status. And if you don't remember my mentioning this, maybe Biden's cognitive status isn't the only person's cognitive status we should be talking about. But that aside, what I had in mind, yes, you deserve a riposte. Yes.
No. But maybe I should hand you the tinfoil hat. Here you go, Bob.
Thank you. Through the magic of television. But no, I just had in mind, like, kind of keeping it a secret. I didn't have in mind the full-fledged, kind of Maginot line against the 25th Amendment. It's interesting. I mean, the Washington Post had a piece, I think, noting how many of these people are close, trusted associates of Biden's. And now there are people, look, it's a natural inclination to want people you can trust in your administration. I think too much of it can be a bad thing. And this is, of course, sheer conjecture, our related theories about it.
Yes, I actually stole it from Mark Krikorian, an immigration activist. I didn't realize I had, but then I looked back and realized.
You actually stole it from me, half of it from me, but you didn't realize that either, apparently.
You didn't have the 25th Amendment angle.
I know, that's why I said half of it.
Well, that was my angle. But I think it's interesting that only the Constitution says the principal officers of the executive departments, and that has been interpreted to mean only the 15 cabinet members. I don't think it even includes the gratuitous cabinet members like John Kerry, ambassador for global warming, or the ambassador to the United Nations, who was elevated to the cabinet, or the national intelligence director. I think it's really just those 15.
Does that include Neera Tanden at OMB?
It's a very good question. I was assuming yes, but I don't think so.
Some internet
there's a list.
Some internet archivist delivered to me on Twitter the now deleted Neera Tanden tweet, to which I replied, which I alluded to during last week's podcast. So that was not lost to posterity. So the entire exchange between me and Neera Tanden, which got a little bitter, is now available to future historians. But we'll talk about that in the parrot room, because I don't actually have it right here. I'll have to dig it up.
Was this about Neera Tanden knuckling under to the Israel lobby?
No, that was different. We did talk about that last week. However, but here's my what I want to say is, like, if you're even talking about the Biden administration as if there is going to be such a thing, that suggests you did not listen to Steve Bannon's podcast today. Is that true?
That's true.
Okay.
Your mind has been poisoned by listening to Steve Bannon's podcast every day.
You might think he's disheartened. After all, on Monday, these states will actually choose their electors, as I understand it. And after that, the train is very hard to stop, unless you hope that the Supreme Court, in dealing with this Texas Attorney General's lawsuit that has now been joined by everyone except for you and me, all the rest of the universe is party to this lawsuit. Unless you think that lawsuit is going to be successful, you might think that things are approaching hopeless for Steve Bannon. Is that what you would think?
You might think, although I don't understand all these safe harbor and electoral college voting deadlines. It seems to me they can all be voided at the last minute by Congress.
Well, before I tell you how Steve Bannon is going to keep Joe Biden from being president, let me give you my understanding of safe harbor. It is very complicated. Safe harbor happened on Tuesday. I think one thing it apparently does is that if a state sends two rival delegations of electors to Congress, which has happened.
Right.
So, and I guess that would be the case now if, for example, the state legislature in, say, Pennsylvania or Michigan sent a different set of electors. The one that was already in place by safe harbor is given preference. So in other words, I think it's too late for state legislators to do that unless they do a more dramatic version that probably needs sign off from the governors. But anyway,
thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's very confusing. And then even after Monday, it's actually alarmingly easy, it seems to me, for Congress to intervene in January. It can't happen this time because Democrats control the House, but apparently, if one senator and one representative raise objections to any given state's delegation, then the whole Senate and House get involved, and I think they have the power to really do serious meddling. Again, it can't happen this time because the houses are not both in Republican control, but this whole thing seems unduly messy. And all the more reason. I mean, first of all, don't you think this whole mess is all the more reason to get rid of the Electoral College? Just do the popular vote. We would not be going through this, and there would be no incentive to do fraud because you'd have to do it on such a large, centralized scale for it to make a difference. If there weren't a few swing states where 30,000 votes could swing it.
You could do fraud on a large scale.
But you'd have to. You'd have to, is my point.
Right. No, I understand. But I tend to like the Electoral College, but I agree that the Constitution's machinery is incredibly clumsy. There has to be some machinery if you have the Electoral College. There has to be some machinery if you have the popular vote. Who certifies the popular vote? Who counts it? Et cetera, et cetera.
Well, that's not hard to do.
But there are a lot of opportunities for mischief with the states sending the delegations and Congress accepting the delegations, and
it's a mess.
Anyway,
none of this matters.
It will probably turn out that the the way to make it simple is to say, so and so determines who wins, and the Supreme Court approves it, and boom, it's done. But anyway, sorry, go ahead.
Anyway, none of this matters because Steve Bannon has a plan that works along a totally different channel, and I'm about to share that with you.
I'm excited.
Now, you've heard that Hunter Biden is being investigated for income tax evasion.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
Well, we're getting to it now, apparently, because this figures into Steve Bannon's plan. So Rudy Giuliani, who, by the way, has, for better or worse, recovered from COVID, is on the Bannon show this morning, and Bannon says, do you think William Barr should appoint a special prosecutor to investigate Hunter and Joe Biden, and all their shenanigans in China to insulate the investigation from, meddling by the Biden administration Justice Department? Rudy says, yeah. Bannon says, would you be willing to serve as a special prosecutor? Rudy says, yeah. Bannon needs three yeses, and he's got 2 of them. And the next question is, based on what you know now, just based on the Hunter Biden hard drive, with which you're intimately familiar, do you think you could bring an indictment against Joe Biden before Inauguration Day? Rudy's like, sure, I can do that. He says it would be a streamlined indictment. It wouldn't be the full indictment that I would do for all 30 years of criminal activity by Joe Biden, but I can do that.
But what would that accomplish? So we elect an indicted president.
No, you're right. I guess it won't work. But I was thinking, like, if he were in prison, it would be harder. It would be harder to govern.
Well, that's a secondary consideration. He has to be convicted before he goes to prison.
If I imagine if he had said, and could you get a conviction before? Rudy was in a very pliable state.
There's a right to a speedy trial, and that would be a speedy trial.
Yeah, you don't want to deprive him of constitutional rights.
As Edward Bennett Williams says, the least exercised right in the Constitution is the right to a speedy trial. So that's ultimately unconvincing. I'm so disappointed. My theory is Biden is getting the credit for all the good things that are happening with COVID and the vaccine. It's like he's already president and he's issued his plan for 100 million vaccines in 100 days and 100 days of mask wearing. Mm-hmm. Now, there's science, right, as somebody pointed out. It's weird how the science comes out to 100 every time, 100, 100, 100. It's almost
well, that's how many they bought, I think. Well, actually, no, it's not. But anyway,
no,
go ahead.
It's a number plucked out of the air for PR reasons. It's like George Bush ending the Iraq War won George H.W. Bush after 100 hours, which was stupid. It's an arbitrary figure. Anyway, everybody's sort of assuming Biden's already president, so he's getting credit for the things that are happening. By the time of January 20th, he will have done so much, he doesn't really need to take the oath of office. His work is done. So it's the ultimate filer faster thesis. He's elected, but things happen so fast that he doesn't really have to take the oath of office. That's good,
because he's going to be in the slammer. I'm telling you, man, this plan is airtight.
Well, I'm glad to know that. There's one other. Bob, your cognitive decline is evident.
I know that. It really is. I'd like to talk about that in the parrot room.
So is mine. Who am I speaking to, please? No. Are you
going to bring up... No,
Shelley Berman. That was a Shelley Berman routine. Who am I speaking to, please?
Okay.
We talked about that. The one way to interpret this jihad against Senator Feinstein is as a warning shot to Biden. And if the left can take out California's senior senator on grounds of cognitive decline, Biden better worry about himself about being taken out himself for reasons of cognitive decline. And they're not gonna do it, but it gives the left more power. Biden has to satisfy them just to keep them calm and happy. So it's not like it's ever going to happen. It's just one of these, ways of influencing Biden to appoint more progressive and to pursue more progressive policies, or else.
I think you should put your tinfoil hat back on. This seems a little.
This
But by the way, speaking of the name,
I tweeted it out.
Yeah.
I don't think it was. I got a couple of Mickey, this is beneath yous, but I always got those. They may have been in regards to that theory. But
yeah. Actually, this is far from the thing that's been most beneath you. This is, compared to some other things, this is was pretty lofty in aspiration. And
thank you, Bob.
I knew Dianne Feinstein's daughter.
I think that was a backhanded compliment.
I knew Dianne Feinstein's daughter in 6th grade. I only mentioned that. Yeah.
I detected an undercurrent of hostility there.
No, there was no such thing.
And we're supposed to be bros.
We are bros. This is a bro show.
Right. So anyway.
This is like, Joe Rogan uses us as a role model. I think Joe Rogan watches us for inspiration.
So you were just about to talk about something.
Nothing significant. I knew Dianne Feinstein's daughter in 6th grade. It only came to mind because you mentioned Shelley Berman, and her last name was Berman because Feinstein's first husband was Berman.
I respect Feinstein like everybody else. I've had 2 interactions with her. One, I had this wacky friend of my mom's, was a distant relative of hers and had fallen on hard times. It was living in the desert without a bunch of money, and Feinstein actually helped her out. I was impressed with that.
I've always thought highly of Feinstein,
and I thought this woman would get nowhere, and she did get nowhere. And I also saw her talk at the funeral of Cam Kawada, who was a great guy, a political aide, in part to her, I think, but to the Democratic Party. He's the guy who came up to me after I ran for Senate and said, "Mickey, I thought your campaign would have more oomph." Okay, so
a lot of us did.
These politicos are, thanks, Bob, bro.
No, it wasn't. I wouldn't call it a failure.
It should have had more oomph. He was right, but it was blunt. These politicos are blunt. Anyway, she gave a talk. She was completely coherent. She revealed at the talk that we had killed Osama bin Laden. That was the day we'd killed Osama bin Laden. And so, back then...
She said it before Obama said it?
Correct. She's on the Intelligence Committee.
Okay.
It was just a small group of Cam Kawada's 150 closest friends. It was revealed hours later, but she seemed totally on top of it. So the cognitive decline wasn't evident then, and this whole thing reeks of a hit job.
No, but Mickey, apparently, I mean, I didn't read that much of the New Yorker piece about this, but at some committee hearing, she read the same question twice in a row with no awareness that she was doing that. Apparently it was like super awkward. I think it was Jack of Twitter who very gamely repeated his answer twice without saying anything awkward, like, didn't I just answer that question? But so it became kind of a public thing. I mean, not to undermine your latest conspiracy theory, but I think it's like some journalist was almost bound to address it.
Yeah, that's bad. I've seen senators, they routinely read questions and mispronounce words, and it becomes obvious they don't know what the fuck they're talking about. So there are often embarrassing moments at hearings like that where people are reading prepared.
I think this was a lengthy question.
But they're also, if they weren't out to get her, they wouldn't have made an issue of it. If she hadn't hugged Lindsey Graham they weren't sort of out for blood for some reason.
I now feel bad about having ridiculed her for that and complained about it because politically it was a bad move. But now I think, you have to only have sympathy.
But, the Occam's razor in this is not my tinfoil hat conspiracy, but it is. Jane Mayer has written a lot about the Supreme Court and Supreme Court nominees. She's very tight with the liberal opponents of conservative justices, and they're pissed at Dianne Feinstein, so made the story became evident to Jane, so that's why she published it. It doesn't have to be a larger conspiracy than that.
So speaking of the Supreme Court, I think in a way it's good that Texas has brought this case in because it may provide a kind of a climax to the whole thing. So But
Absolutely.
do you have a sense for the timing? Like, when is the Supreme Court? Because Monday is the day, right? With the electors, as I said. Do you have any sense for when the Supreme Court might do something?
No, you'd think they'd want to do it by Monday.
You would think.
But,
and now, are you as confident as everyone else that they're going to swat this thing down?
Yes, I mean, if you read the arguments against it, you become convinced that, well, maybe there is something to it, because the arguments actually aren't that convincing. But the idea that they're going to, the idea that they're going to overthrow an election because of it is insane. So yes, I think it'll be swatted down.
Well, I mean,
it would be a rather dramatic expansion of the Constitution to sort of equalize vote provisions in every state.
Well, yeah, I mean,
they're not about to mark on that.
I mean. So the basic idea, I gather, is that the Constitution says state legislatures should determine the manner in which the electors are chosen. And in these 4 states, other actors, governor, secretary of state, in some cases the clerks, did things that, according to this argument, were rightly the job of the state legislature in the sense of, modifying the rules by which this or that happened or signatures were verified or whatever. I think it's a hell of a coincidence that the 4 states that Texas thinks did this are the 4 states where Biden won by a slim majority. In other words, I'm sure if you looked at all the states, most of them are probably doing stuff like this. And in fact, Texas, of course, the governor, who is not the state legislature, laid down this rule that you can only have 1 drop-off box per county, which, if you've ever seen the size of some counties in Texas, is kind of crazy.
I think he claimed to be restoring the legislative rule from what it was before. I don't know. Anyway, I don't think they don't pretend to have looked at every state. Of course they're going after the ones that are crucial to overturning the election. Do they pretend otherwise? Do they claim to have done an
Don't you think it undermines
review of?
Don't you think it kind of undermines the case if all of these states that are saying their voters were deprived equal protection or whatever the hell it is by virtue of what these 4 states did are themselves doing the same thing? Doesn't that actually, in a logical sense, undermine the case?
No, because it's still unequal. I mean, once you start talking about equality, you open up the door to incredible intrusion.
So their argument then is these states
they violate the law a little more than Texas did, or
but I'm saying it wouldn't turn out to be more in many of these cases. Obviously, this is
that's
a
for
widespread...
the court to decide, Bob.
And by the way, I mean, as far as whether the problem is how dramatic the remedy is, I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but I wouldn't think you'd have to go that far to swat this down, because I think the Constitution says the state should determine, I think the line is, the manner in which the electors are selected. Remember, at that point, it wasn't the norm that a popular vote would do it. So if a state legislature says the electors will be chosen by popular vote, that is choosing the manner in which, and they could say by majority or they could say plurality.
Right.
It's not clear that the Constitution meant that the state legislature should regulate every aspect of the manner in which they are chosen. Right. So it seems to me this thing is totally. But I would. Yeah, go ahead.
I think it's all they're asking is for that the states send their own electors now. They ignore the election and send their own electors. That's still quite a big step. It's a bogus. It's a loser suit. It's not going to go anywhere. It shouldn't go anywhere. I'm just saying that it wasn't completely like aliens from. It wasn't Bannon-esque. It didn't say aliens from outer space came and stole our election.
I still say that if you took a close look at the laws of all these states and the rules of all these states, the suit would basically boil down to, we are suing these states because they are violating the Constitution in a slightly different manner than we are violating it, and that leads to unequal protection. Well, that is just crazy on the face of it.
And there are a bunch of equal protection cases, I'm sure, that are very similar. You have a big trial and you decide, you see who's more unequal than anybody else. You know, if it was a case of voting rights, you'd say, it's not a defense for depriving blacks of voting rights that some other states also deprive blacks of voting rights. You could still bring that suit. You'd have a big trial would last 5 years, and at the 5 years when Biden isn't president, then you have a new election. So it's like, it's not. I don't think your argument is that powerful, but it's a crazy lawsuit. So it's going to be thrown out.
I'll settle for that. Now, do you think that A, it will be a unanimous ruling, and B, that the justices, sensing the importance of this moment and like how divided the country is, will swat it down, along with an opinion that kind of does maximal damage in a sense to the claims of fraud? You don't think so? You don't think it'll be a rhetorically powerful?
No, they'll deny it, and it's more powerful if they just deny it in a piece of scrap paper that they leave on the front porch.
I don't agree. I don't agree. I think if there could be a 9-0 ruling saying that, kind of implying that there's just a lot of people out there in Trump world who are full of shit.
I think that would be a disaster because the people in Trump world hate experts lecturing them on how crazy they are.
Well, it would depend.
Much better if they just lose.
You think so?
This guy Krebs saying, "I'm sitting on top of the federal bureaucracy. I can assure you that it was the safest election ever." Well, he doesn't know that, and what people react against that because they know he doesn't know that. He's just pontificating, and the Supreme Court would just be doing the same thing.
I mean, I think there is something. I think there's a way the Supreme Court could say it that would be effective, but I grant that in the end, it's a trade-off. It's like they could say something that would convince people who are kind of on the fence, Republicans who are kind of on the fence about the legitimacy of this whole thing, and could move them back toward, kind of my side, but might at the same time deepen the alienation of the hardcore. I grant that.
Everybody who's on the fence that could be moved back to your side has been moved back to your side.
I disagree.
They've had people lecturing them for 4 years. If they're still with Trump, they're going to stay with Trump until it decays naturally.
No. I mean, I'm not talking about whether with or against Trump. I mean, whether they believe there was fraud. And I don't believe that all of the persuadables have been persuaded for various reasons.
What does the Supreme Court know about whether there's fraud or not? It doesn't. I'm
not saying it. I'm not saying it should opine explicitly on whether there's fraud. I mean, there are things it can say suggesting that a lot of the activity you're seeing is frivolous and without foundation, without passing judgment on the fraud question per se. But
fraud.
But you're not as concerned as I am about this to begin with. And
well, this is one of the big things we wanted to. One of the two big issues we have to discuss is one. Is the public permanently poisoned in a way that threatens democracy because it thinks the election was stolen, because a large segment does? And two, will Trump fade away? I think those are the two big issues this week.
Well,
let's talk about number one.
The numbers say that that close to half the country, I think, right now, kind of thinks there was fraud, right? Isn't that kind of the numbers you've been seeing?
I guess 80% of the Republicans think there was fraud. I don't know if it's half the country. 80% of African Americans thought OJ was innocent. Okay, that was right after the trial. How many think he's still innocent? Very few, I think. It decayed quite significantly. So this will decay, or it won't decay. I mean, it'll be one of the interesting.
I agree with that. Well, no, I think you've done a good job of underscoring the basic possibilities.
There are a lot of people who thought that, Nixon had beaten Kennedy. And I tweeted something about it, and our friend...
Uh-oh.
The cognitive decline is
25th
evident.
Amendment. I'm invoking the 25th Amendment.
Greenberg.
David Greenberg?
David Greenberg. There you go. David Greenberg, who am I speaking to? David Greenberg has written about this and convinced me that while there was some fraud, sort of like now, there was low-level fraud maybe, but it wasn't enough to overturn the election. And And that's the way it's going to be forever. People are going to say there's low-level fraud, but it probably wasn't enough to overturn the election. Some people are going to say it was enough to overturn the election. Was Kennedy widely perceived as an illegitimate president? No. Has Kennedy gone down and did the country fall apart? No, it didn't fall apart.
Because
there's a lot of...
Because Nixon didn't do what Trump is doing, and B, Nixon didn't have this large base of people whose whole narrative is we are being persecuted by elites who are lying to us. Okay?
Right.
Totally incomparable situations. This has no relationship to 1960 whatsoever.
Not completely incomparable.
Nothing like it.
Actually, what Greenberg has done some research and notes that Nixon did contest the election. He just had his minions do it while he pretended to be above it. I agree that's different.
That's very different.
But he did contest it. All I'm saying is that we can have, in Bush versus Gore, was also certainly tainted. I tend to think if Gore had played his cards right, he would have won the recount. So, of course, Bush was tainted. The country went on. It didn't fall apart. And so I'm just...
But again, Gore did the exactly right thing instead of exactly the wrong thing. That matters. And he wasn't going to spend the next 4 years, as we know Trump will, trying to nurture this particular grievance.
Well, I think it'll be part of his catechism that I really won, et cetera, et cetera.
You think?
He does have the money to do it. He's raised over $200 million. I'm told maybe $250 million, which he can spend mostly on himself if he wants in the course of contesting it. So that gives him a strong financial incentive to keep it up.
Plus the country's way more polarized now than it was in 2000. We've already had a number of deaths, people with guns killing people on the other side. This is just a completely different situation. Plus, the balkanized media did not exist in 2000. It's a totally different landscape. And can I just take you briefly into Bannon land and tell you the kind of stuff that's going on there? So, because I do think that is representative of what's going on in what is now a large media ecosystem, especially as people migrate, as the hardcore migrate from Fox to One America News and Newsmax. And, Bannon is representative of what's being told to a lot of people. And can I just say a little something about this truck driver? I alluded to the truck driver. Have you heard about the truck driver?
I think we talked about the truck driver last week.
Okay. And believe me, a lot of Americans are very aware of him because he's become this icon, okay?
What did he allege again?
He claims that apparently I guess he was a contract driver for the U.S. Postal Service. He claims he had a truck full of ballots, picked them up in New York, was told to drive them to Pennsylvania. So we're already in weird territory here because that shouldn't happen. And then he parks the truck in Pennsylvania and the truck is stolen. Now, first, let me tell you some things about this guy that nobody in Bannon land is being told. And this is partly, I think, the mainstream media's fault. There should be, in the New York Times, there should be a piece in the New York Times about this whole thing. On the other hand, part of the problem we face is that the New York Times and CNN and the Washington Post and so on have, by joining the resistance 4 years ago, reduced whatever credibility they would have had in Trump world, which might never have been a lot, but still they've reduced it. And that's part of the problem that they're not seen as honest brokers here. Anyway, let me just tell you. So this guy's name is Jesse Morgan, and Bannon's had him on twice this week. They're having protests in New York where supposedly he picked up the ballots regularly and Bannon covers them. Now, here are some things they're not being told in Bannon land. This guy, Jesse Morgan, he's a ghost hunter who did a film called The Shadows Amongst Us. He filmed it with his smartphone, and it's available on Amazon, where he claims to document that a shadow person, quote, was sighted in his basement. There's footage of the alleged shadow person, which apparently looks somewhat the way a regular person would look with a costume on. But anyway, it's a fleeting glimpse, so could be. He tells you how you...
I can't believe you haven't watched this video.
I'll get...
You're supposed to go the extra mile.
There's a long weekend ahead. There is the Army-Navy game. Mickey, who do we root for in the Army-Navy game?
I have no idea.
Army is the correct answer. But that will leave me time to do it. Okay. He tells you what you need to recite to make the shadow people go away. Okay, fine. And now I'm reading from a news account. In 2006, Morgan pleaded guilty to forgery, sentenced to 5 years probation, served 6 months. In 2008, a judge resentenced him to a year and a half in prison, according to court records. In 2019, his wife filed for protection from abuse. He had done several things, put a tracker on her phone, tried to poison her by putting medication she's allergic to on her pizza. Court documents associated with this say that this truck driver had been involuntarily committed for mental health reasons, quote, about 5 times. He's threatened to kill himself on multiple occasions. Okay. And it's weird because when Bannon when this guy first showed up, Bannon said, and yeah, there's this truck driver. Now I've heard like he's got a record or something, but we'll see. Well, that was the last we heard about the record because it turned out the record completely undermines his credibility. And now Bannon is turning him into a hero. And I want to play you what Bannon said today. Oh, the other thing is when this guy comes on Bannon's show, there was a flurry of enthusiasm when people heard that, hey, the FBI and the U.S. Postal Service investigators are investigating his claims. Well, when you hear this guy talk about the investigation, it's clear that what they're investigating is whether they can indict him for issuing a false affidavit, right? So, and this is what Bannon is complaining about. Apparently these investigators ask this guy, Jesse Morgan, well, how did you get hooked up with this? There's a guy named Phil Klein who I guess, unveiled Morgan and brought him on stage. So, I hope this is loud enough, but here's, this is the way, Bannon is describing, the guy I just described. So.
Again, because nobody in the Justice Department, nobody's reached out to the driver. Jesse Morgan, another hero. He stepped forward. Not one thing. They all want to know, how did you meet Phil Klein? How did you get on stage with Phil Klein? That's what they want to know. They want to know how he got the word out there. That's what they want to do. They want to suppress it all. Because Jesse Morgan is just some grundoon. Jesse Morgan is just some working stiff. Jesse Morgan is just a deplorable. He doesn't count in their world. They just want to keep his mouth shut and keep driving your truck and pay your taxes. Oh yeah, and go serve in these overseas wars. That's what they want.
Okay.
Steve Cortez.
So, anyway, I know you don't think this is important. I'm telling you, there's a lot of people in this ecosystem, and
I'm doing a very poor job of defending my position, but
you noticed that too.
We've had a series of alarmist claims about Trump, and they've all petered out. And you're very excited, and you think that democracy is going to be changed forever by this new threat. And I suspect it will peter out enough so that it doesn't make that much of a difference. If we have 30% of the population that thinks the election was stolen, we'll have 30% of the population that thinks the election was stolen. I do think there will be some right-wing terrorism. I think the alarms about that are completely valid. That if Trump had won, there would have been immediate riots in the street, stores burned down, looting, demonstrations, secession, all sorts of things. If Trump loses, there'll be nothing, but there'll be a few crazy right-wingers who are extremely violent who will do something awful. And I think I think all the paranoia about that seems totally
There are
justified.
people who think that 30% of the population thinking their president is illegitimate and stole the election is a serious problem. I am among them, and I'm not even sure the number will be that low. Right now, the numbers aren't that low. In 4 years,
there'll be another election. We only have to make it through 4 years until another election. A classic example of hysteria is the New York Times when Hunter Biden it came out that he was being investigated. They tried to make the case that this is just Trump persecuting his enemies, and they refer to an article that had the list of Trump persecuting his enemies, and there's basically nothing on it. He hasn't persecuted his enemies. Yet remember, when he came into office, there were all these charges. He was going to be like Putin. He was going to put oligarchs in jail. There were a few occasional whiffs of it, like he threatened CNN at one point. It didn't happen. Okay, all the hysteria was bullshit. Okay?
As I've said, his saving grace is his incompetence.
And it wasn't incompetent.
It is incompetence.
He didn't even try. He was at Rostow that says he was play acting. He said, Attorney General Barr should indict this person and indict this person and indict Biden. And then when Barr doesn't do it, nothing happens, okay? That's not incompetence. That's like not caring. That's not even trying.
Yeah, well, I mean,
and, Yasha Monk and Masha Gessen and all these people who said he was like Putin, all bullshit.
Well, the way we got Trump, and by the way, the people whose grievances he claimed he was going to address deserve to have a leader. They deserve to have a representative who takes seriously the questions they raised. But instead we got Trump, this bizarro, creepy guy who I personally believe only failed to do more damage to the Republic because he's so incompetent. That's my belief. We differ on that. But you just, given that their grievances gave us him this time around, I just don't want to let their grievances fester. I just don't want to let them get worse. And they are getting worse. This election and the way Trump has handled the aftermath are making things worse.
No, I agree they're making things worse. I just don't think they're, calamitous to democracy. Although it's a very bad thing he's doing, and there's also a monetary basis for it, which is he's raking in money.
Well, it's a grift. It's a grift for all concerned.
He could use money.
It's a grift for all concerned. These people come on Bannon show like the guy who lost the election to Connor Lamb in Pennsylvania. And he's filed a lawsuit. And, oh, by the way, you can contribute money to this. And then Boris Epstein, one of Trump's attorneys, comes on and, my Twitter, he comes on like every day and says, Steve, thanks so much. My Twitter following has doubled since I started coming on your show. It's just like everyone is using this for their own purposes.
Is there a parallel effort on the left to make money off this? Well, there's a Lincoln Project. So
Well, Biden asked for money to help do the transition that initially was being denied him by Trump.
But nobody said stop Trump from stealing. Stop the steal, or nobody's. And there's a money making opportunity
that could
there
be our thing
for somebody who wants to say donate to me so I'll stop Trump.
We could do that.
That
could be
the steal.
I'm up for that.
That's your baby, Bob.
I will stop the steal. No, you know what would be? You know what would be a good cause? Actually, seriously, I really think even after inauguration, well, I think somebody should have done a good job. One of the most explosive and effective pieces of quote evidence is that videotape of the Georgia ballot counting, which I think has been successfully debunked, but not in a way that's effective for those who have seen the initial video. Nobody's done, so far as I know, the counter video, right? Like, yeah, here's what you saw. Here's what is also on the video. And that's why, what you saw was so misleading.
I'm not sure you can make that video. I'm convinced enough that it's, but now I wasn't last week, that it's been, there's enough people have said it was legitimate that I'm not all that worried about it anymore. But I don't think you can make a video proving it to anybody. And there's sort of the larger problem. It would be great. There may be other.
I think you could make a persuasive video.
There may be, but isn't that what MSNBC is for? I mean, that can be done.
Well, but that's the problem. It's kind of like the Hunter Biden thing. It's like they'd rather wish all this stuff went away than, and I think sometimes they're half afraid of what they'll find if they start looking into it. I think they very much were with the Hunter Biden hard drive. Right. And so there's no good debunking of the things that can be debunked out there. Now, again, the MSM doesn't have much street cred in Trump land, partly due to its own, mistakes, I think. But I still think, like YouTube, did you hear that YouTube, according to the Bannon podcast, which is where I get all my news now, but YouTube has, they've said that now that, in fact, they said because Safe Harbor had arrived, which is a weird threshold for this, they were going to quit allowing videos that claimed widespread fraud or something like that. They're doing some kind of suppression.
I think Twitter has even taken down tweets that say, look at this crazy person expressing, claiming there's widespread fraud, and then it retweets somebody claiming widespread fraud, but it's attacking them. They take that down too, because it brings up the subject of widespread fraud.
Well, maybe that's laudable, but I think the YouTube thing is just going to backfire. Well, I mean, to at least be symmetrical. If you're going to suppress one, suppress the other.
It's not symmetrical. It's just mindless. They're saying.
Well, just let me finish the YouTube thought. YouTube would be better off if there were videos debunking these things, to have its algorithm bring those to the attention, at least be on the menu for people who are watching the original videos rather than suppress it, which I think will just make things worse.
Okay. I agree that it'll make things worse. It's weird. I thought, like many people, I thought, well, gee, maybe I should try to start a neutral investigative organization that would, that would investigate these things and not be biased like the New York Times and therefore be credible.
Yeah.
I guess ProPublica was supposed to be that. But and then I realized it would be the marketplace would kill it the way it's probably killing ProPublica. If you look at the list of most visited sites that came out last week, the bizarre one is Yahoo. I don't know why Yahoo is number 5, but the lesson it has is you got to be either left or right. Sure. If you're in the middle, you're dead.
Sure.
So I think it's futile to start that at this moment. I agree. So we're just going to have to learn to sift between left and right and figure out what's correct.
Well, I think
voters sort of do that. So.
I think it would be worth trying to do straight news. I don't think that's what ProPublica tried. I mean, ProPublica does specific investigative missions. It doesn't put out a daily, thing, so far as I know, that is supposed to be. It wouldn't take much resources to really try to do a daily summary. It's very derivative. You just look at the different news sources, do a pithy summary of things. It's doable, and
well, that's easy to do. A website that gleans from everybody else's work and pronounces judgment, but that's called a Substack. I have one of them.
No, but which newsletters take it as their mission to provide as close as they can honestly come to an objective view?
Using adding extra reporting or just giving their objective view?
No, skip the extra reporting.
I don't know. My friend John Ellis has one called News Items that reflects his views, but they're
that's what I mean.
Neutral.
Not that.
It's hard not to reflect anybody's views, Bob. You have to.
No, but you can do your best to be an old-fashioned newspaper, the kind that the New York Times used to be. At least try.
It could be done. I think you would discover that you would make a good living for one person and not for two.
Right, that is the problem. But it would be progress. So what was the second big thing we were going to discuss, or did we discuss it?
Will Trump fade away? Will Trump fade away? And I've read all the, Jack Schaefer had something this week saying he'll fade away, and there was something by Yasha Monk in the Atlantic, and none of them. I want to be convinced because it's in my interest to claim he'll fade away. And I
don't think so.
I want to see a new standard bearer for Trumpism. I want Trumpism without Trump. But none of these arguments have persuaded me.
No, and that's one thing he's doing with this election aftermath, I think, is ensuring that he will have a pretty substantial and at least very fired up following. And again, I think this is the virtue of however marginal your success is, somebody trying for months to come to set the record straight on the more egregious and egregiously wrong fraud claims. Especially the powerful ones, like the videotape from Georgia.
It's weird. Does the left have an interest in helping Trump fade away, or do they have a financial interest in keeping any Trump controversy alive, because that's what generates ratings, and Biden is soporific. If they just talk about Biden, they will lose all their audience. I think certainly cable news wants to keep all Trump controversies alive, so they will help Trump in this, when really the effective strategy would be to ignore him.
Well, there may be a separate interest the left has, which is that, what we're seeing now, I mean, look at Georgia, for example, may lead to so much dissension within the party that it's bad for their prospects in the general election. I mean, if a lot of moderate, Republicans get primaried and replaced not just by like right-wing Republicans, but like crazy right-wing Republicans, we've seen in the past where that comes back to haunt them, right?
Well, if Yes, although I agree that if they lose the Senate, if Republicans lose the Senate runoffs, that's a devastating, world-changing blow to them, and the left has every interest in fomenting any dissension that it can. After that, isn't it? It's pretty difficult for them to blow the House election in 2022. It just
Republicans?
Seems, yeah.
Yeah, you generally win when you're not in the White House at a midterm
so Biden
election.
will do controversial things, and he'll piss people off, and if he's as uninspiring and mediocre as it looks like, he'll even McCarthy couldn't blow it, I don't think.
I think that's true. Now, as for the Senate, I heard on the DMZ podcast, I hadn't realized this, but even if they win both elections in Georgia and control the Senate, they can't do big stuff because I think it's Joe Manchin is opposed to changing the filibuster rules or something. So Republicans will still be able to stop, say, D.C. statehood and maybe even major health care. I don't know. Is that true?
It's sort of true, but there's a question mark about Manchin.
Is there?
Always.
Good.
Yeah, he's transactional, as they say in the business, Bob. You know what transactional means?
Yes, it's what everyone is, and everyone accuses everyone else of being. Yes.
Right, but it means he's exceptionally open to changing his vote if he's made the right offer. There are things they can do in terms of senior moment.
We should note that we should
reconciliation.
While we're waiting for your Sudafed to kick in, I should tell the audience that you took it late.
The word is reconciliation. I'm looking for there. Welfare reform passed via reconciliation. Obamacare passed via reconciliation. You can do a lot via reconciliation.
Okay.
I asked my immigration people, can they completely screw up? Can they give amnesty via reconciliation? And they thought no, which I was surprised at because it seems to me anything that affects the budget you can stick in via reconciliation and you could make an argument. It doesn't have to affect it positively or negative. It just has to affect it. It's hard to believe that amnestying 11 million people has a neutral effect on revenues. So,
I
think they can do incredible damage through reconciliation.
But D.C. statehood can only happen if they change the filibuster rule, right? Because I'd like to see that.
I don't even know. It depends what the reconciliation rules themselves are subject to dispute, so they're very arcade. So, I think the big problem with reconciliation is they can only do it once a year. Mm-hmm. So they have to cram everything into a big reconciliation bill. It eventually becomes unwieldy.
Now, what's your prediction on the Georgia Senate races?
My prediction would be that Perdue will win and Loeffler will lose.
So the one who didn't show up for his debate will win.
Correct, just because Loeffler is such a weak candidate, and her charges against Warnock are maybe the latest ones, that they've been saving about him resisting arrest or interfering with an investigation into child abuse at one of his. Maybe that'll catch on, but the charges that he's a socialist are, they're like these charges that make you think the other. I think I was perfectly happy to think he was a socialist until I read Loeffler's charge that he was a socialist. It's like completely thin stuff. So,
but he does have these things he said when he was before his political career started from the pulpit that I don't disqualify him in my eyes, but I wouldn't think play well even among centrists in Georgia. Like you can't serve God in the military. God and the military.
I agree. There's damaging things. The question is, do people overlook that? Yeah. The way they overlook Reverend Wright's sermons, which are,
Well, Obama did throw him under the bus and leave that church.
Maybe Warnock can throw himself under the bus.
And leave his own church? I don't think so. Have you seen his puppy dog commercial?
Yes.
It's
I
good.
thought it was effective.
It's good. He's very appealing.
He's an appealing guy, and Loeffler is not very appealing, so that's the problem. Now, I'm not saying that these things won't do damage. I'm saying they won't do enough damage. I don't. Maybe the Republicans will win both. Maybe they'll lose both. But if you asked me to put my money on the line, that's what I would say.
But apparently, the thinking is that he is a more in some sense, well, I don't know if he's a more vulnerable candidate than Ossoff in this calculation, but a more attractive target for Republicans because apparently Perdue spends more time talking about him than about Ossoff.
Yeah, well, but it may be that they realize that he is the bigger threat, so they better go after him if they want to win both of them.
Maybe.
So let's focus our ire on him. Their strategy does seem to be to ignore Ossoff, and he's very ignorable, so that maybe that'll work.
He's very smart and articulate. He's just a little too smooth.
I'm not impressed with Republican thinking in these races. It's all the old style Bush playback of calling people socialists. I don't know if that even works anymore when Bernie Sanders does pretty well calling himself a socialist.
I don't know. I mean, Trump did it, and a lot of people did it, and a lot of Republicans did it in this election, and the Republicans did a lot better than expected in the election. I don't know.
That was for a whole lot of other reasons other than calling people socialists.
Maybe.
For example, defund the police. That's effective, apparently.
Apparently.
Yeah, and also Hunter Biden. Whatever leaked out of that might have helped.
Now, what do you think will become of Hunter? Do you think...
Also the fact that Biden ran a passive campaign. He wasn't for anything. He was just for going back to the way we were. Sorry, go ahead.
So what do you think about the Hunter Biden thing? I mean, first of all...
I think it stinks. I'm like John Chait in the P tape. He said he was a P-leaver. And I tend to think that 10% for the big guy meant 10% for the big guy. And that they were kicking back some money Hunter intended to, whether Joe knew anything about it. Hunter was trying to get in the good graces of Joe by kicking back 10%. And it's exactly what it seems to be, which is they were letting the Chinese sluice some money Hunter's way, and he was kicking back 10 to Joe. You have to prove it. It's very hard to prove.
Could also be that that's what they told the guys so that they would get bigger cuts for themselves and failed to mention it to Joe. Could be, a lot of things.
I'm not saying Joe knew about any of this.
Right.
If you were
then
Hunter,
that matters.
Hunter,
I'm sure Hunter did something illegal, of course. I mean, I think the big question is, will it involve Joe? At a minimum, a guy that much of a train wreck can almost not help but commit income tax evasion, right? I mean, he doesn't even remember... Well, we don't know what happened with the laptop, but...
I don't know, but the question of, was Hunter picking up family expenses that otherwise Joe would have picked up? It begins to smell at some point. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what was alleged. The problem... I do have a problem, which is that I'm not at all... I'm insufficiently exposed to the left-wing point of view on this, but...
I don't think
it does seem to be it sticks.
I do think William Barr is interesting because it's looking like, a decision was made not to do this before the election, right, in the Justice Department. There was a piece
publicize it before the election. I think they were proceeding with it.
Well, who knows? I'll bet they could have brought an indictment if they'd wanted to.
And is that? Well, I don't think they have enough to bring an indictment now. If they had publicized it before the election. Would it have helped Trump or hurt Trump? I think it could have gone both ways. Here Trump is doing a show prosecution. This just shows that he's Vladimir Putin and, he persecutes his enemies and this is incredibly corrupt, blah, 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 blah.
I mean, I will say Rudy supposedly has access to the whole hard drive. And the only documents he actually cites involving Joe are... the 10% thing that we've discussed and that I think we agree is, inconclusive in and of itself. And then Rudy, today, he egregiously mischaracterizes that other thing about that cryptic reference to giving Joe 50% of his income, which we've discussed before, could mean, that Joe loaned him money for law school. It could mean a lot of things. And Rudy just completely egregiously mischaracterizes it.
Wait, I knew there was an innocent explanation for the 50%, but what was it?
Well, what I said, look, it's Hunter talking to his daughter, and kind of he's whining about how he gets no appreciation, and he's done so much for his kids, and he says, and I won't ask you for half of your salary like pop or something. And I just said, well, could be that it's family lore that Joe loaned him money to go to law school, but demanded that he repay it. He get 50% of Hunter's salary until the loan was repaid. Could mean a lot of things. It's cryptic. But today on Bannon, what Rudy asserts, he says, there's a document in which Hunter says, for the past 30 years, I've had to give Joe a kickback of 50%. I mean, that's how he like paraphrases the document. But the truth is, all there is the cryptic reference, and he again, he's got the whole hard drive, but he never goes beyond these couple of cryptic things we have in terms of implicating Joe Biden.
Yes, well, that's shame on Rudy, but the cryptic things are suggestive, and one wants to follow them up.
You would like to follow them up, but apparently you're going to have to look beyond the hard drive.
Let's do that.
Okay.
So I have high hopes for the Hunter Biden scandal.
And what do you hope it will do?
He seems to be the gift that keeps on giving.
He is. But what do you hope will happen?
Actually, it's true. I don't hope it'll happen. I mean, I hope it causes Biden to be impeached so Kamala Harris becomes president. No, I don't want that. So a thorn on his side that punctures his moral preening about Charlottesville. How about that?
Yeah, that ought to work.
Hey,
we've been doing this an hour, whole hour.
And we have so much else to talk about.
Yeah, but there's the parrot room, Mickey.
Yeah, I do think the press is sort of coming down harder on Biden than I thought. I mean, there are all these columnists talking about, like David Ignatius, about the lack of vision of his appointees. Now they have to write about something, but they're not celebrating, the fabulous new normal that's here. They're sort of saying, God, this is dreary. I thought Schumer said something interesting about Vilsack. He served 8 years as agriculture secretary, and they're bringing him back. Okay, and Schumer said he's okay for 4 more years, but just 4. Now, what does Schumer mean by that? Did he mean
Joe is only?
Did he mean he wants Joe out of there in 4 years? I think that's what he meant.
Oh, you read
Was
a lot.
He joking? He could have been joking.
A lot into these things, but I think honestly the expectation is that Joe's only good for 4. And one question I have
but it's not Schumer's position to say that.
No, one question I have is to what extent is Kamala positioned to just be the unquestioned replacement? Will there be a big, a fight to replace Joe, assuming he does? He does step down after one term. You think?
No, I think there'll be a big fight. I don't think Kamala is the heir apparent. I mean, imagine Dan Quayle if would he run for office? No, he's not.
But the awkward thing is, like, what if he doesn't say he's stepping down until 10 months before the election or something? Or
the Filer Faster thesis. We can easily have a perfectly legitimate primary in a month.
Can we?
Don't worry about it.
Okay. So, should we talk a little about the vaccine? I mean, look, the pandemic is like, I don't want to be alarmist, but I think in the past week, 18,000 people have died, way more than ever in a week. I think the week before was either 12 or 14,000.
It's alarming. I was figuring, I'm itching to take a drive across the country, and it looked for a while like it was getting a little better, and that might be possible, and then it got worse.
The coast is not clear, no.
Yeah, then it got worse.
And there's a story about supposedly Trump had the option of buying a lot more vaccines and failed or something. Well, I don't know about that.
A couple of points. Clearly one of these vaccines is going to be better than the other. So Trump's plan to have 4 vaccines and everybody will be happy with equally with each one of them, and we've bought enough of them all combined to cover everybody. That's sort of flawed because everybody's going to want the good ones. Whatever they turn out to be.
But suppose in 4 months, I'm not eligible, which apparently I won't be, for one of the good vaccines, but they say, hey, you can have this one that's 70% effective, and then you can take an antibody test and see if it worked. I'd be up for that.
That's not a problem, but what if it has a few more severe side effects? What if it's only 50% effective?
I'm up for that.
Maybe
I don't know about 50,
there seems to be a lot of optimism that all 4 of these vaccines would work pretty damn well. That seems unjustified.
Well, I think two of them seem to be comparable in effectiveness, right. Moderna and Pfizer.
They were right. They were right to want diversity, but they were sort of a little over optimistic that they only needed 100,000 of each one. Seems to me you want 400,000 of each one.
Well, you almost need that because it takes 2 per person, at least the Pfizer and the Moderna.
And then if it was enough for the U.S., then we could give any surplus to the rest of the world.
Well, that's the other thing is like, this is really going to be kind of ugly in terms of just the global distribution. Although, by the way, China is making its vaccine available to some countries that might not otherwise have access, and people will probably start screaming that's like, this is the Chinese menace we have to confront because they're earning a sense of obligation from countries by giving them vaccines.
There were these stories a few weeks ago that China's vaccine documentation was flawed and everybody was laughing at their vaccine. But they went away. So now everybody takes the vaccine seriously.
I'd take it before I'd take the Russian one. Before I'd take Sputnik.
There was an interesting piece by Mark Penn, I thought. He is a pollster, often writes pieces with Doug Schoen. He was Hillary's pollster. He's since sort of drifted a little to the right, I guess. But it pointed out that it said, forget the frontline workers. He sort of fudges that issue, but why don't give the vaccine to the essential workers who aren't frontline workers, and there are a lot of them. Give the vaccine to old people. If we give the old people first, and then the 70 to 80-year-olds, and then the 65 to 70-year-olds, in 2 months or 2 months and plus, we've eliminated 95% of the deaths from the virus. People stop worrying about the virus. The crisis goes away. We can mop up the rest of them at our, as fast as we can, but if we can have a surefire path to eliminating the crisis in 2 or 3 months, let's do that. Screw the essential workers. If they're young, they're not going to die anyway. Let's focus on the people who are going to die and get the virus over with as quickly as possible. And why are we so focused on the essential workers anyway?
Because they're the ones who spread it. They're the ones who spread it. The people in nursing homes.
If they're spreading it to people who aren't going to die, we won't care that they're spreading it.
Yeah, but they're not. I mean, it spreads from person to person to person to person, right? I mean, I was having almost the opposite
But the people who
thought.
die are the over 65. So let's inoculate all the over 65s, and then we don't worry about the spread.
I was having almost the opposite thought. I was thinking, look, if you inoculate the workers, everyone who works at a nursing home, and that's the only people who residents of nursing homes are having contact with, you don't even need to bother with the people in the nursing homes for now because they don't go anywhere. So you could instead spend it on people who actually spread it, like essential workers, and actually, in the long run, maybe save lives.
But people Penn claimed that his was the maximum life-saving strategy, and it was semi-convincing. The other point is people don't want just lives saved. They want to get back to normal. They want to visit their parents in the nursing home. So they don't want the only person to see the nursing home people to be essential workers. And if everybody who's over 65 is vaccinated so they can't die from it, the crisis is over.
You might be better off letting each nursing home resident specify one cherished visitor who gets the inoculation. Because they can spread it. But anyway,
keep it simple, stupid. Just do all the old people and then do the essential people.
One population that is rarely mentioned that I think 2 things. They actually should be in the first round of vaccination, and they may well be, but for some reason people don't mention them. And secondly, Joe Biden should have mentioned them long ago. And that's police. I mean, when Biden, first of all, they, more than anyone, have to have unpredictable encounters with exactly the kind of people who are not going to observe social distancing protocol, right? They have close-range indoor conversations.
Aren't they included as frontline workers?
Maybe, but I'm just saying, as a political matter, given Biden's whole situation, he has several times been talking about, well, we'll do the healthcare workers, and maybe he mentions teachers. I just don't understand why, as a political matter, he doesn't say, and police. He's got Democrats.
Could it be that he's overly influenced by the left?
I just don't think it's occurred to him. But I don't understand why it hasn't, because I think the law and order issue did hurt Democrats during the election.
This raises the issue of cluelessness. For example, he has this appointee for DHS, Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas, who has a bit of a scandal in his past. He has a very damning Inspector General report. I think we've talked about it. And he sets off hackles on the right so they can use this scandal. And does Biden know this? Did Biden know this when he appointed him? Was he adequately briefed? And you would think there would be like a dossier on Alejandro Mayorkas, and it'd say these are the pluses, these are the minuses. But as we know, information has a way of dropping out as it goes up the chain. I want to know how well informed Biden was when he appointed him. He might have just thought, oh, Alejandro, everybody loves him. He's he's actually a centrist. There's some people on the left who think he's too far to the right. So I'll appoint him, he'll be fine. And that would be incredibly telling if he wasn't well informed.
Well, even the Lloyd Austin appointment, the Secretary of Defense, apparently nobody in the administration, because this guy only retired a few years ago, you have to get Congress to give you an exemption from the law that says that nobody can be Secretary of Defense who's been in the military within the past, 7 years or something. And apparently nobody went to the Armed Services Committee and cleared it with them before this was announced and said, can you do this for us? I mean, that's just politics 101.
Well, and the same thing with the VA appointment. I sort of like appointing somebody who pisses off the veterans groups, but they didn't know that they didn't check with the veterans groups to say, hey, we're appointing McDonough to sound it out. He just did it. And so now it sort of looks like a train wreck, even if it's not. You would think they would at least get them on board.
So
maybe they couldn't get him on board.
Buttigieg didn't get that gig. I sure hope they don't make. Yeah,
there is an explanation for why he would appoint McDonough, even though he's objected to by the veterans.
You're putting your tinfoil hat on. What is that explanation?
The explanation is the 25th Amendment, because the head of the Veterans Administration is one of the 15 people who will vote on whether Biden's cognitive decline disqualifies himself from carrying out the presidency. He's got his buddy in there now.
Yeah, I just wonder if they've even thought it through to that point. I suspect that if it's an issue, if the cognitive status issue is influencing these appointments, it's just more the sense that, hey, we don't want people we can't trust having a lot of meetings and then leaking that he seemed out to lunch. I'm beginning to convince myself of my own tinfoil hat theory. But you are the one who has said...
Very dangerous.
You are the one who, unlike me, has, A, watched some of these, interviews Biden has done since the election.
I can't watch him anymore.
But you said he did well. You said he did well.
The ones I've seen, he's done well, because the one that says, hey, look how he mispronounces Becerra's name, embarrassingly, I can't watch them because I don't like watching people humiliate themselves. So... yeah, I mean, in the debates, in the interview with Holt, of whose name don't call the 25th Amendment on me, boy, but Lester Holt of NBC, we're fine.
Okay. No, I think he'll be okay for a while. That's my prediction. I'm more worried, but I tell you, it just seems to me when you look at the various factors at play, including all of these aggrieved Trump supporters. And again, the hardcore are a relatively small number, but they can do a lot of stuff. And they're the activists. They can be important activists, leaving aside, whether they take up arms or something. And and then you got the Hunter Biden thing. They've got more conspiracy theories than they know what to do with. And they ain't going away.
Well, maybe is there a dense pack of conspiracy theories? I guess not.
They blow each other up?
Yeah, no, they don't. They seem to reinforce each other.
I think so. There's a unified narrative here. It's all the CCP. Which, by the way, also is responsible for the virus, in case you weren't aware of that.
We could start an alternative to QAnon, some sort of that would compete with it in the conspiracy space and maybe edge it out, but be slightly less
Slightly
crazy.
more moderate. Yeah, like
we call after you WAnon after Bob Wright.
excellent idea. And what would our position be? Like, there is a conspiracy, but it doesn't involve pedophilia.
Right, and it involves the highest levels of the New York Times and MSNBC, and
Let's save that for the parrot room.
I don't know what else. It has to have some kicker.
I'm writing down WAnon for discussion in the parrot room.
That
Now,
does
Mickey,
not involves George Soros, I hope.
oh, by the way, that's one more thing about Bannon's podcast. It's like he keeps bringing on these guys who are like, for a while, they sound smart. They're filing lawsuits. They're lawyers. Like I told you last week, for example, Lynn Wood, he comes on, he's talking. I'm going like, smart guy. And all of a sudden he starts ranting about communists and the government. And a few days later, he's tweeting that Trump should declare martial law. So anyway, this other guy, who's a lawyer from like the Thomas More Society or something, he's talking about the lawsuits he's filing, and then he starts talking about the aforementioned truck driver. And he says, what I want to know is, what is a truck full of ballots doing parked in New York an hour from George Soros's house? Like, I don't have a lot of experience being a billionaire who's orchestrating a giant election fraud, but I think if I did it, I would not personally load the ballots onto the truck. I think I would delegate that and have it happen far away from my house. I mean, this is a guy who comes on repeatedly and sounds like, here's the latest progress in the lawsuit. It's scary.
Also, he probably has a lot of houses, so probably everywhere in America is an hour from George Soros's house.
There could be. You're right. There could be more than one flaw with this theory. So anyway, we should.
We should wrap it up. I'm disappointed that we only covered like 4 topics. Usually we cover like 10.
That's what the parrot room is for. Okay. What are the other ones we're going to cover in the parrot room, Mickey?
Oh, this doctor who claims he treated a guy with a swastika. Do we believe him?
Dr. Swastika. Okay, wrote that down. What else?
Mickey's confessions about Bruce Hershenson.
What's that last name?
Bruce Hershenson, a conservative who died.
Bruce H. Is Mickey implicated in the death?
Why is everybody getting a blue check mark?
Oh yeah, I want a blue check mark.
Josh Hawley and Bernie Sanders, they're united left-right horseshoe fashion, asking for more $1,200. Josh Marshall objecting to your cartoon about Tony Blinken.
I have a thing or two to say about Josh Marshall
room.
In the parrot room. I'm not kidding. I'm going to torch that mofo in the parrot room.
Well, those are some. I think I'm wandering into last week's topics here, but those are some.
Now, did you say Josh Hawley and Bernie Sanders?
Correct.
Two names rarely pronounced in succession.
Right.
But there we go.
They've teamed up, and he and AOC also have teamed up arguing for direct payments. And I'm all for that, despite being against cash welfare. How about that?
Mickey, the number of patrons, that is to say, the number of people who have access to the parrot room, and leaving aside whether they take advantage of that, are supporting our work.
Right.
Is that your phone?
It's a number I don't know.
Still
doesn't even rise to the level of potential spam. Forget it. I'm ignoring it.
Man, you need a new ringtone. Is that your spam ringtone? Does that recognize spam and then do a bad ringtone?
That's just the standard ringtone.
Ooh.
Oh, another thing. Who should Biden's ambassador to the right be?
Oh yeah, he's going to have an ambassador to the right,
so,
which may be a good idea.
That. Okay, you were talking about the parrot room. Sorry.
Yeah. So, people who go to patreon.com/parrotroom and can listen to our Parrot Room podcast, or just have the satisfaction of knowing that they are supporting fearless journalism of a kind that is all too rare. And Mickey, we now have I think 580 something patrons. And, when we started this a few months ago, you remember all the doubters and the haters who said, yeah, you may get to 500, you may get to 550, but you'll never get to 600. Remember them?
No.
No. Neither do I. But if they existed, they would be very close to getting their comeuppance because we're not far from 600. Okay? And they are not far from their comeuppance. These people who might have existed even if they don't.
So punish these imaginary people.
See, I've been listening to Bannon. I know how you get stuff done. There is an enemy out there. And I think they're calling. Answer the phone. Put it on speakerphone. I'm curious. Come on, do it. This is great TV. Come on, Mickey. Come on. Speakerphone.
No way.
Speakerphone.
I never even heard of this area code that they're calling from.
Okay.
But we should...
What else? Our newsletters. Mine is Nonzero. The Nonzero newsletter. Yours is Kausfiles. Your Twitter handle is KausMickey.
But it's Kausfiles on Substack. The kausfiles.com... I'm having glitches and I haven't fixed them yet. Okay.
Whereas you can go to nonzero.org or go to the Substack Nonzero. And my Twitter handle is Robert Wright. What else? Are there other things we promote? I guess we'll find out in the Parrot Room.
Good idea. Anyways, we have a lot to talk about there, so...
We do.
I will see you there.
So I will see you there.